I joined Sullivan Technologies as Director of Product Development 4 years ago, the same year my sister Rebecca became VP of Marketing. Our family's connection to the company ran deep. Our father had been one of 3 founding partners back in 1998, building Sullivan Technologies from a garage startup into a $380 million software company specializing in enterprise resource planning solutions. When Dad retired 3 years ago, the company's ownership structure was divided among the founding partners and their families. Dad retained 18% ownership, Uncle Greg held 15%, and the third founding partner, Marcus Sullivan, no relation to our family despite the company name, owned 22%. The remaining 45% was distributed among various board members, early employees, and outside investors who'd supported the company through its growth phases. At least that was the ownership structure everyone believed existed. The reality was considerably different, but I'd spent 3.5 years ensuring nobody discovered that fact until I was ready to reveal it. My position at Sullivan Technologies started modestly. Director of Product Development was a solid mid-level role. I managed a team of 18 people, oversaw the development roadmap for our flagship ERP platform, and reported to the Chief Product Officer. It was respectable work, but nothing that would make anyone think I had ambitions beyond product management. Rebecca, meanwhile, had always been the ambitious one. She joined Sullivan Technologies with clear executive aspirations, networking aggressively with board members, positioning herself as a strategic thinker, and making sure everyone knew she was destined for the C-suite. 2 years ago, our CEO, Marcus Sullivan's son, David, made a series of questionable decisions that tanked a major product launch and cost the company approximately $23 million. The board pushed him out and the search began for a replacement. Rebecca campaigned aggressively for the position. She was 34, charismatic, well-connected within the company, and had Dad's full support. The board interviewed her along with 4 external candidates. They hired someone else. Amanda Chin, a veteran tech executive with 20 years of experience scaling software companies. Amanda was brilliant, strategic, and exactly what Sullivan Technologies needed. She stabilized operations, refocused the product strategy, and started rebuilding client trust. Rebecca was furious. She'd expected the CEO position and viewed Amanda's hiring as a personal rejection. Over the following 18 months, Rebecca became increasingly critical of Amanda's leadership, questioning decisions in board meetings, undermining initiatives, and building a coalition of family members and sympathetic board members who felt Amanda was too conservative and not growing the company aggressively enough. What Rebecca didn't know, what nobody knew, was that I'd been systematically acquiring board seats and voting proxies for 3 years. It started with Marcus Sullivan's retirement. Marcus had been my mentor since I joined the company. While everyone else saw me as just another product manager, Marcus recognized that I understood Sullivan Technologies' core technology better than almost anyone else. I'd spent countless hours in the code base, understanding the architecture, identifying inefficiencies, and proposing improvements that had quietly generated millions in cost savings. When Marcus decided to retire at 72, he called me to his office. "Natalie," he said, "I'm selling my 22% stake. I've received offers from 3 private equity firms, but I wanted to talk to you first." I was surprised. "Why me?" "Because you're the only person in this company who actually understands what we built," Marcus replied. "Rebecca is all flash and strategy presentations. Your father is brilliant but wants to golf more than work. The board members are financiers who see us as an investment vehicle. You're the only one who cares about the actual product, the technology, the foundation that makes everything else possible." "I don't have the capital to buy 22% of the company," I said honestly. "I know," Marcus smiled. "But I'm not asking you to buy it all at once. I'm offering you a structured buyout over 5 years at a favorable interest rate. My estate will collect payments and you'll gradually acquire full ownership. The terms will be better than anything you'd get from a bank because I want this stake in the right hands." I spent 2 weeks analyzing the offer, running financial projections and considering the implications. Then I accepted. The transaction was structured through a holding company, Cascade Investment Partners LLC, that I controlled. On paper, Cascade owned Marcus's 22%. I was listed as managing director of Cascade, but most people assumed it was an investment fund, not a personal vehicle. That gave me my first major board position. Over the next 2 years, I acquired more positions quietly. 3 board members who held 3% each retired and wanted to liquidate their positions. I bought all 3 stakes, 9% total, through Cascade. An early employee who held 4% needed cash for a medical emergency. I purchased his stake privately at fair market value. 2 outside investors who'd been disappointed with returns wanted to exit. I bought their combined 8% through a different holding company, Meridian Holdings LLC, that I also controlled. Then Dad decided to simplify his estate planning. "I'm 70 years old," he told me over lunch. "I don't want your mother dealing with complicated business holdings if something happens to me. Would you be interested in buying my 18%? "That's a lot of capital, Dad," I said carefully. "I'll make it easy," he replied. "I'll sell it to you at a 15% discount and carry the note myself. You pay me over 10 years, and when your mother and I are gone, whatever's left unpaid is forgiven in the estate. Basically, I'm giving it to you gradually while getting some cash flow now." I accepted immediately. Through these various transactions, my total ownership reached 61%. I controlled the company, but nobody knew it because everything was structured through holding companies and trusts that didn't obviously connect to me. The board composition was Cascade Investment Partners 22%, Meridian Holdings 17%, Northern Capital Trust 14%, Pacific Strategic Ventures 8%, and various smaller shareholders. I controlled the first 4 entities. I was the majority shareholder and, more importantly, the controlling director with authority over board decisions. But the board documents didn't publicize ownership details, only the entity names and their voting representatives. My name appeared nowhere in the public materials that family members and employees saw. I attended board meetings as the representative for Cascade Investment Partners, sitting quietly in the corner while Rebecca and her allies dominated discussions. I was waiting for the right moment. That moment came 6 weeks ago, when Rebecca initiated a campaign to replace Amanda Chin as CEO. It started with a family dinner at Dad's house. Rebecca had invited the whole family, Dad and Mom, Uncle Greg and Aunt Patricia, my cousin Michael and me. "I want to discuss Sullivan Technologies," Rebecca announced over appetizers. "I think we need a leadership change." Dad set down his fork. "You mean Amanda? She's been doing excellent work. The company's on track for record revenue this year." "Record revenue isn't the same as optimal growth," Rebecca countered. "Amanda is competent, sure, but she's too risk-averse. We should be expanding more aggressively, pursuing acquisitions, moving into new markets. Instead, she's focused on consolidation and incremental improvement." "That's called sustainable growth," I said quietly. Rebecca barely glanced at me. "Natalie, you're not in strategy meetings. You don't see the opportunities we're missing." "I see the product roadmap," I replied. "And I see that Amanda's incremental improvements have increased platform stability by 47% and reduced customer churn by 34%. That sustainable growth is why our revenue is hitting records." "Customer retention is fine," Rebecca dismissed. "But we need visionary leadership. Someone who'll push boundaries and take big swings." "Someone like you?" I asked. "Yes," Rebecca said without hesitation. "I should have been CEO 2 years ago. The board made a mistake hiring Amanda, and it's time to correct it." Uncle Greg leaned forward. "Do you have board support for this?" "I've been talking to board members," Rebecca confirmed. "Several agree that Amanda's leadership style isn't ambitious enough. If the family unites behind a leadership change, the board will have to listen. We control enough voting influence to make this happen." I said nothing, just continued eating my salad. "What do you think, Natalie?" Mom asked. "You work closely with Amanda. I think replacing a competent CEO without cause is usually a mistake," I replied carefully. "But it's ultimately a board decision." "The board will follow family leadership," Rebecca insisted. "Dad, you're a founding partner with significant ownership. Uncle Greg, you're on the board directly. If we present a united front, we can push this through." Dad looked uncomfortable. "Rebecca, I'm not sure this is wise." "Dad, trust me on this," Rebecca pleaded. "I've been positioning for executive leadership my entire career. This is the right move for the company and for our family's legacy. After 2 hours of discussion, Rebecca got what she wanted: a family consensus to pursue Amanda's replacement. I abstained from the vote, saying only, "I'll support whatever the board decides officially." Rebecca moved quickly. She scheduled an emergency board meeting for the following month, citing strategic concerns requiring immediate board attention. She lobbied board members individually, building support for Amanda's removal and positioning herself as the obvious replacement. I watched it all happen, attending board meetings as Cascade's representative, saying nothing while Rebecca presented her case. 2 weeks before the emergency meeting, Rebecca felt confident enough to approach Amanda directly. I was in Amanda's office discussing a product integration issue when Rebecca knocked and entered without waiting for invitation. "Amanda, can we talk?" Rebecca asked, her tone falsely sympathetic. "Of course," Amanda replied professionally. "Natalie, do you mind?" "Actually, this concerns the board," Rebecca interrupted. "Natalie can stay if she wants. She should probably hear this anyway." I stayed curious about Rebecca's play. "Amanda, I want to be direct," Rebecca began. "The board has concerns about your leadership direction. Several members feel the company needs more aggressive growth strategies, and frankly, your conservative approach isn't generating the returns our investors expect." Amanda's expression remained neutral. "Which board members specifically have these concerns?" "I can't disclose confidential board discussions," Rebecca said smoothly. "But I'm telling you this as a courtesy. There's going to be a vote at next month's meeting about leadership changes. You might want to prepare for that possibility." "I appreciate the heads up," Amanda replied calmly. "Though I'd point out that our last 3 quarters have exceeded projections, customer satisfaction is at all-time highs, and we're on track for 18% revenue growth this year." "Numbers aren't everything," Rebecca said. "Vision matters. Strategy matters. The board wants leadership that will take Sullivan Technologies to the next level." "And you believe you're that leadership?" Amanda asked directly. "I know I am," Rebecca replied confidently. After Rebecca left, Amanda turned to me. "How much support does she actually have?" "Some," I admitted. "She's been working the board for months. But board votes can be unpredictable. Natalie, you've been here 4 years and you're always in those board meetings as Cascade's representative. What's your read on this?" I considered my answer carefully. "I think you should prepare for a challenging meeting. Rebecca is very confident, which means she believes she has the votes." Amanda nodded slowly. "And where does Cascade stand?" "I haven't received voting instructions yet," I replied, which was technically true. "Cascade's position will be communicated at the meeting." The emergency board meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. The conference room was packed. 12 board members, Amanda, Rebecca, the CFO, the chief operating officer, and several major shareholders who'd requested to attend. I arrived early, carrying a leather folder containing documents I'd been preparing for 3 years. Rebecca arrived at 8:55, looking polished and confident. She'd brought a full presentation deck outlining her vision for Sullivan Technologies' future. Aggressive expansion plans, acquisition targets, new market opportunities. The board chairman, Gerald Hutchins, called the meeting to order at precisely 9 a.m. "Thank you all for attending this emergency session," Gerald began. "We're here to discuss concerns that have been raised regarding Sullivan Technologies' strategic direction and executive leadership. Rebecca Harrison has requested the opportunity to present her perspective." Rebecca stood and launched into her presentation. 25 slides covering market opportunities, competitive positioning, growth strategies, and leadership vision. She was articulate, persuasive, and compelling. "In summary," Rebecca concluded, "Sullivan Technologies has enormous potential that's currently unrealized. With more visionary leadership, we can triple our valuation in 5 years. I'm proposing that the board vote today to transition to new executive leadership. Specifically, appointing me as CEO with authority to implement the aggressive growth strategy I've outlined." Several board members nodded approvingly. Gerald turned to Amanda. "Amanda, would you like to respond?" Amanda stood, no presentation deck, just calm professionalism. "I've been CEO for 18 months. During that time, we've stabilized operations after a disastrous product launch, increased revenue by 47%, improved customer retention by 34%, and positioned the company for sustainable growth. Rebecca's vision is impressive on paper, but it prioritizes speed over stability. The aggressive expansion she's proposing would require $80 million in capital we don't have, would stretch our operations beyond our current capabilities, and would put customer satisfaction at risk. He paused, scanning the room. The board hired me to rebuild this company's foundation. That work isn't finished. Changing leadership now would be premature and disruptive. Thank you, Amanda, Gerald said. The floor is now open for board discussion. Rebecca's ally Martin Webb spoke first. I think Rebecca makes excellent points about unrealized potential. Sometimes companies need to take calculated risks to achieve breakthrough growth. Another board member, Susan Park, agreed. Amanda has done solid work, but perhaps it's time for a more aggressive approach. Uncle Greg raised his hand. I support Rebecca's vision. As a founding family member, I believe she represents the next generation of leadership this company needs. Dad looked uncomfortable but nodded. The family has discussed this extensively. We believe Rebecca is ready for this responsibility. More board members chimed in, the majority seeming to lean toward Rebecca's proposal. Finally, Gerald turned to me. Natalie, you're here representing Cascade Investment Partners. What's Cascade's position on this leadership proposal? I opened my leather folder and pulled out the first document. Before Cascade states its position, I said calmly, I need to clarify the board's voting authority structure. Rebecca frowned. What do you mean? The board operates under our corporate bylaws, I continued, which specify that certain major decisions, including CEO appointment and removal, require approval from directors controlling at least 51% of company voting shares. I want to ensure we're following proper procedures. Gerald nodded. That's correct. Which is why we're conducting this vote. The board collectively represents all major shareholders. Understood, I replied. But I need to clarify exactly which board members control which voting shares, because there seems to be some confusion about the ownership structure. I distributed copies of a document I'd prepared, a comprehensive breakdown of Sullivan Technologies' complete ownership structure. The room went silent as people began reading. What is this? Rebecca asked, scanning the document with growing alarm. That's the current shareholder registry, I explained. As you can see, the ownership structure has changed significantly over the past 3 years through various private transactions. I watched their faces as they processed the information. Cascade Investment Partners owns 22%, I continued. Meridian Holdings owns 17%. Northern Capital Trust owns 14%. Pacific Strategic Ventures owns 8%. Combined, these 4 entities control 61% of Sullivan Technologies. We know that, Martin Webb said impatiently. Those are the investment funds. Those investment funds are all controlled by the same beneficial owner, I interrupted. Me. The silence was absolute. I'm sorry, what? Rebecca said slowly. I pulled out additional documents. The formation papers for each holding company, the trust documents, the purchase agreements from every transaction over the past 3 years. I am the managing director and sole beneficial owner of Cascade Investment Partners, I explained methodically. I am the managing director and sole beneficial owner of Meridian Holdings. I am the trustee and primary beneficiary of Northern Capital Trust. I am the managing director and sole beneficial owner of Pacific Strategic Ventures. I looked around the room. I own 61% of Sullivan Technologies, which means I am the controlling director for all major board decisions, including CEO appointment and removal. Rebecca's face had gone from confident to pale to red. That's impossible. You're a product director. Where would you get the capital? Marcus Sullivan sold me his 22% 3 years ago through a structured buyout, I replied calmly. 3 retiring board members sold me their combined 9%. 2 outside investors sold me 8%. Dad sold me his 18% through a favorable family arrangement. Various other transactions over time brought my total to 61%. Dad was staring at me. You never told me you were buying other stakes. You never asked, I replied. You wanted to simplify your estate and generate some cash flow. I offered you a good deal. The transaction was exactly what you wanted. I just didn't mention that I was also acquiring other positions simultaneously. Uncle Greg found his voice. Why would Marcus Sullivan sell to you instead of a proper investment firm? Because Marcus cared about who would steward his life's work, I answered. He knew I understood the technology, the product, and the company's foundation. He trusted me to preserve what he'd built rather than strip it for parts. Gerald Hutchins, the board chairman, was reviewing my documents carefully. These appear to be legitimate. Natalie, are you claiming authority as the controlling director? I'm not claiming it, I replied. I'm exercising it. According to the bylaws, all changes to executive leadership require approval from directors controlling at least 51% of voting shares. I control 61%. Therefore, no CEO change can occur without my approval. Rebecca stood up abruptly. This is insane. You manipulated everyone. You've been scheming for years. I've been investing for years, I corrected. Every transaction was voluntary. Every seller received fair market value or better. Marcus approached me about buying his stake. The retiring board members approached me. Dad approached me. I didn't manipulate anyone. I simply purchased shares from willing sellers without announcing I was accumulating control. But you hid it, Rebecca accused. I use standard investment vehicles and legal structures, I replied. Nothing I did was hidden. It's all documented in corporate filings. You just never bothered to look beyond the entity names to see who controlled them. Susan Park spoke up. Natalie, why keep this secret? Why not disclose your ownership position? Because I wanted to see how the company operated when no one knew I was watching, I said. I wanted to understand the real dynamics. The politics, the decision-making, the strategic thinking. If everyone had known I was the majority owner, they would have performed for me instead of showing me who they really were. I looked directly at Rebecca. And I wanted to see if my sister would try to remove a competent CEO out of personal ambition, or if she'd prioritize the company's actual interests. Now I know. The room erupted into chaos. Rebecca was shouting about betrayal. Uncle Greg was demanding to know why Dad had sold me his shares without consulting the family. Martin Webb was trying to understand the legal implications. Gerald Hutchins banged his gavel. Order. Everyone calm down. The room quieted gradually. Natalie, Gerald said, as the controlling director, what is your position on the CEO leadership proposal? I looked at Amanda, who was sitting very still, clearly as shocked as everyone else. I oppose any change in CEO leadership, I stated clearly. Amanda Chin has been exceptional. She stabilized this company, refocused our strategy, and delivered consistent results. The aggressive expansion Rebecca is proposing is poorly researched, undercapitalized, and would put customer relationships at risk. I pulled out another document from my folder. I've prepared a detailed analysis of Rebecca's proposed strategy. The acquisition targets she identified are overvalued by an average of 43%. The new markets she wants to pursue have entrenched competitors and would require 18 to 24 months to break even. The $80 million capital requirement would necessitate either significant debt, which would harm our balance sheet, or outside investment that would dilute family ownership. I slid the analysis across the table to Gerald. Rebecca's vision isn't wrong, it's just premature. We need another 2 years of foundation building before we're ready for aggressive expansion. Amanda is the right leader for this phase. Rebecca's voice was shaking. You can't do this. You can't just block the family's decision. I'm not blocking the family's decision, I interrupted. I'm exercising my authority as the controlling shareholder. This is how corporate governance works. You wanted to use family influence to replace the CEO. I'm using ownership control to prevent that. Both are legitimate exercises of power. Mine just happens to be stronger. Gerald, Rebecca turned to the chairman desperately, this can't be legal. There has to be some governance violation. I've reviewed the documents, Gerald replied. Everything appears properly structured. Natalie owns 61% through legitimate transactions. As controlling director, she does have authority over major decisions including CEO appointment. Unless someone can demonstrate fraud or procedural violations, Her position is legally sound. Dad finally spoke. Natalie, why didn't you tell us? Would you have believed me? I asked. 2 years ago, if I'd told you I was buying up the company, would you have taken me seriously? Or would you have dismissed me as the product director who didn't understand real business strategy? Dad had no answer. I spent 3 years being underestimated, I continued. Rebecca treated me like a technical employee who didn't belong in strategic discussions. Board members saw me as the quiet representative in the corner. Everyone assumed I was just doing my product management job without bigger ambitions. That underestimation allowed me to build this position without interference. I looked at Rebecca. You've been campaigning for CEO for 2 years. I've been building actual control for 3. You focused on visibility in politics. I focused on acquiring power. Now we both see which strategy was more effective. The meeting ended in disarray. Rebecca stormed out, refusing to speak to anyone. Uncle Greg and Aunt Patricia left quickly, both looking shell-shocked. Dad stayed behind, sitting silently while the room emptied. Amanda approached me cautiously. Natalie, thank you. I'm not entirely sure what just happened. I prevented an unnecessary leadership change, I replied. You're doing excellent work. The company needs stability, not disruption. But you own 61% of the company, Amanda said slowly. Which means you could replace me whenever you want. Am I working for you now? You were always working for shareholders, I pointed out. I'm just the majority shareholder. Continue doing what you've been doing. Deliver results, build the foundation, make smart strategic decisions. As long as you do that, your position is secure. And if I don't? Amanda asked. Then we'll have a different conversation, I replied honestly. But I don't expect that to happen. I didn't spend 3 years acquiring this company just to install poor leadership. Amanda nodded slowly. I appreciate your confidence. And your support today. After she left, I sat alone with Dad. You should have told me, Dad said quietly. I sold you 18% thinking I was helping you build a nest egg, not enabling a takeover. Would you have sold to me if you'd known? I asked. Dad considered this. Probably not. I would have worried about family dynamics, about Rebecca's feelings, about disrupting the existing power structure. Exactly, I said. So I made it easy. You wanted estate simplification and cash flow. I offered you both. The transaction was exactly what you wanted. I just didn't explain all my other moves. That's manipulation, Natalie. That's strategy, Dad. Rebecca tried to manipulate the board into replacing a competent CEO to serve her ego. I used ownership control to prevent that. Which one is actually worse? Dad had no response. The aftermath was brutal but predictable. Rebecca resigned from Sullivan Technologies 3 days after the board meeting. Her resignation letter was 2 sentences. I resign from all positions effective immediately. I cannot work in a company where my own sister has been secretly undermining family interests. Uncle Greg and Aunt Patricia stopped speaking to me entirely. Family dinners became awkward affairs that I usually skipped. Martin Webb and Susan Park, the board members who'd supported Rebecca, also resigned, citing philosophical differences with majority shareholder direction. I replaced them with experienced tech executives who understood enterprise software and sustainable growth strategies. Dad and I didn't speak for 2 months. When we finally had lunch, he was subdued. Your mother wants me to repair things with you, he said. She says you were just protecting your investment. I confirmed. But I was also protecting the company. Rebecca's strategy would have been disastrous. Maybe, Dad conceded. But you could have told us. You could have been honest about what you were building. If I'd been honest, you all would have stopped me, I replied. Every step of the way, you would have questioned my decisions, doubted my judgment, and tried to maintain the status quo. I didn't have time for that. So I worked quietly, built actual power, and revealed it when necessary. Dad was quiet for a long moment. Your grandfather would have been proud. He always said the best business moves are the ones your competitors don't see coming. Rebecca wasn't my competitor, I corrected. She was my sister who happened to want something that would hurt the company. I chose the company. That's cold, Natalie. That's business, Dad. You built Sullivan Technologies by making hard decisions. I'm just continuing that tradition. 18 months after the board meeting, Sullivan Technologies was thriving under Amanda's continued leadership. Revenue had grown 34% since Rebecca's resignation. We'd successfully launched 2 major product updates that increased platform capabilities by 60%. Customer retention was at 96%, the highest in company history. The aggressive expansion Rebecca had proposed? We implemented a modified version, but only after 2 years of foundation building with proper capitalization and market research. The result was entry into 3 new markets that generated $47 million in new revenue with minimal risk to existing operations. I'd restructured the board with experienced tech executives who understood both innovation and sustainability. The new board was collaborative, strategic, and focused on long-term value creation rather than quarterly ego battles. Most importantly, I'd implemented a new governance structure that separated family ownership from operational control. Family members still received dividends, but strategic decisions were made by qualified board members and executives, not by whoever had the loudest voice at Sunday dinner. Rebecca had taken a VP position at a competitor, where I heard she was doing well. We didn't speak, but I followed her career from a distance. She was good at marketing and strategy, just not ready for CEO responsibilities. Dad and I had rebuilt our relationship slowly. He'd come to accept that I'd done what was necessary to protect both the company and the family's investment. I still wish you'd told us, he said occasionally. But I can't argue with the results. Uncle Greg remained distant, but Aunt Patricia had eventually reached out. I didn't understand what you were doing, she admitted over coffee. I thought you were being secretive and manipulative. But watching how the company has performed under your oversight, you knew what you were doing all along. I did, I confirmed. I just needed everyone else to figure that out. 2 years after taking explicit control, I stood in front of the annual shareholder meeting, presenting Sullivan Technologies' performance and strategic direction. The company was now valued at $580 million. A 52% increase since Amanda's leadership began and my ownership became public. We'd grown from 340 employees to 520. Our platform was recognized as industry-leading. Client satisfaction was the highest in the sector. Amanda sat in the front row, confident and respected. The executive team she'd built was exceptional. The board I'd assembled was experienced and strategic. After the presentation, Dad found me in the hallway. I've been thinking about that board meeting 2 years ago, he said. When Rebecca was so confident she could push through the CEO change, and then you revealed you'd been controlling everything all along. What about it? I asked. I finally understand why you did it the way you did, Dad replied. If you'd announced your ownership when you first started acquiring shares, Rebecca would have fought you every step. The family would have fractured. The board would have become a battlefield. Instead, you waited until she overreached, then revealed your position at exactly the moment when it was undeniable that you were right. Perfect timing matters in business, I agreed. It was brilliant, Dad admitted. Brutal but brilliant. You let Rebecca build her case, let her commit fully to a bad strategy, and then demonstrated why you were the better steward of the company. That's not just smart ownership, that's strategic genius. I learned from the best, I replied. You and Marcus taught me that the most powerful moves are the ones people don't see coming. Dad smiled. Marcus knew what he was doing when he sold you his stake. He saw something in you that the rest of us missed. He saw someone who cared about the product more than the politics, I said. Someone who would spend 3 years in the code base understanding how everything actually worked instead of just reading executive summaries. That's the person he wanted controlling his life's work. And he chose correctly, Dad acknowledged. 5 years after the board meeting revelation, I was sitting in my office, which was still in the product development wing, not the executive suite, when Amanda stopped by. I have news, she said, smiling. We just closed an acquisition. One of the companies Rebecca identified in her expansion proposal 5 years ago. Which one? Asked curious. Techstream Solutions. Remember? Rebecca wanted to buy them for $120 million. We just acquired them for $38 million. I pulled up Techstream's recent performance. The company had struggled over the past 5 years, burning through cash and losing market share. They're a distressed asset now. Exactly, Amanda confirmed. If we'd bought them when Rebecca proposed, we would have overpaid by $82 million for a company that would have drained resources for years. By waiting, we acquired the same technology and customer base at 1/3 the cost, without any of the toxic culture or operational problems they've since resolved. That's the difference between aggressive expansion and strategic patience, I observed. Rebecca had vision, Amanda said thoughtfully. But you had timing. Vision without timing is just expensive. After she left, I thought about the past 5 years. The revelation, the family conflicts, the rebuilding, the results. I'd started as the product director everyone underestimated. I'd become the controlling shareholder nobody saw coming. Rebecca had wanted to be CEO through force of personality and family influence. I'd become the company's controlling owner through patient strategy and systematic execution. She'd focused on the title. I'd focused on the power. She'd wanted recognition. I'd built control. And when the moment came to reveal what I'd built, there was no contest. Her political maneuvering couldn't compete with my 61% ownership stake. The board meeting where I'd opened that folder and changed everything, that wasn't the victory. That was just the reveal. The real victory was the 3 years of quiet work before anyone knew what I was building. The relationships with sellers like Marcus who trusted me. The careful legal structuring. The strategic patience. I'd won the game before Rebecca even realized we were playing. And that, ultimately, was the whole point.